All right. Good evening, everybody around the world, and welcome to Private Eye Matrix Revealed on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I'm your host, Private Eye, as always, and with me is my producer, Joe Kiernan. Bravo. Thank you for being with me again.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
And Don Morshad, who is our assistant producer. Welcome.
Hey. Thank
Don.
you.
All right. Okay, so tell me, Joe, how's the weather now? Is it better? Is it snowing?
Oh, no, it's beautiful. About 80 degrees right now.
80
It's still beautiful here. It's still summer, full swing.
Well, you know, I'm always jealous because you live right on the beach, which is amazing.
I am a very lucky man, yes.
I guess our speaker last week, which was John Cameron, he lives in Montana, and he was saying, and he actually Facebooked me, and he told me that it's 29 degrees and snowing.
Wow.
Unbelievable.
Wow.
Because it's really hot over here.
No.
Yeah. All right. So anyways, Revolution Radio is the only 100% listener supported. So please go to our website, freedomslips.com, and click donate. We depend on your donations. And if you'd like to call us on our second hour, please contact us by calling 347-688-2902. Or if you really have to, call my producer, Joe Kiernan, directly at 843-491-6077, or simply Skype Freedom Screen. All right, I do have a couple of news that I wanted to share with you. As most of you know, I'm also a MUFON investigator. And interestingly enough, actually, UFO over Northern California leaves witnesses, and experts were perplexed as to what was going on September 15th, just recently. A UFO appeared in the skies above Northern California in the early morning of Friday, September 12th. That is when it actually happened, September 15, when the article was written. And at least 30 witnesses in the Bay Area watched a strange object streak across the sky at approximately 6 a.m. I wouldn't see it because I'm usually asleep. Some described the object as a white light, while other people said it was orange, but the light was seen with fog or smoke billowing out behind it, which is kind of weird, billowing out. I don't know what that is. Joe, what do you think that means?
I have the foggiest idea. I would really like to see. I'd really like to see the pictures involved, though.
All right. You know what? I will during the break, I'm going to go ahead and put the link so you can actually share it if you like. It was sent to me by the director of MUFON, Ruben Uriarte, just a few days ago.
Very
but
good.
Anyway, yeah, it's strange. I mean, I think, Don, you saw it too, right? Did
well,
you
I've seen one in the early hours of the morning. I saw one in the evening in Santa Rosa from Spring Lake Park, where somebody actually ran over and called us over and said, "Hey, did you see that?" And they took us over to where it was, and it was something hovering in the sky. They said they described what it had done, and we watched it for a while. It kind of had a strange hover, and then it did a little bit of what they said, and it dipped below the horizon, and it came back up another time. But it was really quite strange to look at. By the time we got the binoculars, we only got one quick look at it. So.
And there were other witnesses too, I heard, and in fact they reported it to MUFON. And I know what I heard from the witnesses on that one, that it was an orange light hovering that turned into a line across the sky.
Wow, very cool.
Which was very interesting, and it kind of went up and down.
They said that it was orange. It was really an orange, and it would change a little bit as we were watching it. And then they said that it went into a long, thin white light. Well, I watched it do this weird kind of doubling, where it doubled in size and kind of tripled in length. So it had the light was like two lights with a thin one between it, and then it went back later, and then it kind of flashed. And I wish I'd seen all the other stuff those guys saw.
Right.
Right. Awesome. I mean, there are witnesses that actually reported that one to MUFON, and I'm actually interviewing them in the next few days. I'm hoping that actually that witness is going to come and share a very interesting story he also shared.
That'd be great.
me. Yeah, I may have to, if he doesn't come on board and actually call in, I'm going to have to announce his story. Very interesting. I can't wait to tell. All right. I'm like a little girl, just really excited because tonight and for the next few weeks, we're going to enter the realm of the mysterious, the paranormal, and the downright terrifying subjects, stories such as phantoms, angels and demons, and of course UFOs and abductions and so forth. And honestly, I have received at least 4 books. Well, let's start with the one tonight. Our speaker and author of It Was a Dark and Creepy Night, Joshua Warren. There were only 3 rules when Joshua Warren began collecting these stories from around the world. They had to be true, short, and send a shiver down your spine. Joshua Warren has been professionally investigating the paranormal and spiritual for over 20 years. He's the author of almost 20 books, including Simon & Schuster's How to Hunt Ghosts and the free audiobook, The Oblivious Gods. He's appeared on the History Channel, Discovery Channel, Nat Geo, Sci-Fi, Animal Planet, TLC, and starred in the Travel Channel series Paranormal Paparazzi. Oh, that's interesting. Warren owns a museum and laboratory in Asheville, North Carolina, and earned the cover of the science journal Electric Spacecraft in 2004 for his work reproducing ghostly plasmas in the lab. He spends his time between Asheville and his Bermuda Triangle research base in Puerto Rico, which he was just there last time I contacted him. He was widely considered an expert on the mind-body-environment relationship and our connection to spirits, UFOs, cryptids, ESP, and interdimensional beings. His groundbreaking research into radionics and alternative energy is a popular topic with his audience around the world. His new anthology is called It Was a Dark and Creepy Night. Real-life encounters with the strange, mysterious, and downright terrifying. His website, joshuapwarren.com. So welcome to our show, Private Eye Matrix Revealed. Joshua?
Thank you very much, Monique. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight.
Thank you so much. You don't have a North Carolina accent.
Yeah, it's funny. I hear that a lot.
Do you have an accent, or is it just me? Yeah, so you don't have an accent.
No, not really. And, it's funny because my family has been in western North Carolina on both sides for hundreds of years.
Happens.
Oh, yes. Technology is always wishy-washy.
Welcome back, folks. Thank you very much.
Okay, welcome back, everyone, to Private Eye Matrix Revealed again with Monique Liston. And my guest is Joshua Warren with us, who is the author of It Was a Dark and Creepy Night. And by the way, Josh, I just want you to know that I saw you. I saw you on television several times. And when I saw your picture, I actually recognized you. So, there.
Was it? I hope it wasn't America's Most Wanted then.
No.
Well, you are a private investigator, so.
I know. Interesting because, America's Most Wanted, I almost ended up on that as a host.
Really?
Yes. That was back in 2011. Yeah, but
wow.
They went off the show. Anyways, I want to know more about you and how did you become involved with paranormal research?
Sure. Well, going back to growing up in Asheville, North Carolina, that is the heart of the oldest mountains in North America. And so, growing up, I always enjoyed the old ghost stories around the campfire and pioneer tales and Native American legends. But there was something in particular that happened to my family even before I was born that I believe played a big role in inspiring my interest.
Right.
My grandmother was named Virginia Calloway, and she was probably about 13 years old during the Great Depression, and her family lived in a big old farmhouse out in the country. and she got a camera for her birthday, which was quite a nice gift at that point in history for a kid. And one day, her older brother, named Claude, who was probably in his 20s, and their father, a guy named Jack, came back from a hunting trip. And they posed with their rabbits and squirrels and little small game as she took a picture. And when this photo developed, her older brother Claude did not have a head in the photo. Uh-huh. And, of course, they knew that was weird, but they didn't understand enough about photography to know just how weird it was. And then we fast forward 1 month later. Well, Jack was in the kitchen fixing lunch, and Claude was on the porch reading a magazine, and the two were conversing through an open window. And at one point, Jack spoke to Claude, and Claude didn't answer. And then when the lunch was ready, Jack walked outside. Well, here was the magazine on the porch, but there was no Claude. And my great-uncle Claude was never seen or heard from again. He had literally vanished in mid-conversation, in the blink of an eye, and that was a big tragedy in my family. They never understood what happened to him. They never got over it. And if you consider that a month before his head was missing in that picture, it gave a very eerie twist to his fate. And I believe knowing that that was a real incident that happened in my family and seeing how it affected them gave me a very realistic view of the idea there could be other dimensions and the idea that the paranormal is a very tangible, real thing.
Well, Josh, I actually grew up with paranormal myself, having lost both my parents and my mother having died in my arms. It changed my life. It was almost as if, because she was a psychic, my grandmother was a psychic, and something happened when she died, as if like she just kind of jumped inside me. And few very interesting things happened right before she died, which was actually a dream that I had about her. And I don't want to take up too much of that time, but really changed my life. In the world of paranormal, strange things started happening, and they haven't stopped. And I'm wondering, can something happen in someone's life that actually opens their eyes to the world of paranormal?
Yeah, absolutely. It seems to me that it's almost essential for one to have some kind of a personal experience, because when you start looking at the idea of paranormal investigation and you watch all these television shows, of course you have a lot of people running around with gadgets and equipment and instruments, and they're trying to document things, but the reality is every single piece of equipment is made by a human, it's constructed by a human, it's being used by a human, the data is being interpreted by a human. There's a human component involved in every part of this, and so the human experience is still a very mysterious thing in general. We don't know exactly what consciousness is and how to define this thing called self-awareness. And so when you start looking at the boundaries of what we consider reality, you start traveling down a rabbit hole that can get very, very deep and twisted. And for many people to sort of accept the reality of the unknown, that personal encounter is the most profound thing. And that's why in this new book, It Was a Dark and Creepy Night, it's wonderful that we have about 150 of these true stories from people all around the world and numerous countries. And whether we're talking about ghosts or UFOs or cryptids or psychic phenomena or angels or demons or synchronicity or my favorite category, other, that doesn't quite connect.
Well, I do have an other question about the other. Could possibly the Black Eyed Kids fall into that other category?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great one. That's a really weird, fascinating subject, Monique, because, we don't know precisely if this is something we could think of as ghostly or if these are alien or interdimensional. And it starts sort of blurring those lines because, Charles Fort, the American researcher of strange phenomena in the 1800s, he said, you can measure a circle beginning anywhere. And I think when it comes to some of these subjects, that's a very interesting quote to keep in mind. It's almost like that if you study these things deeply enough, you'll find that aliens and ghosts and interdimensional beings are all sort of connected in certain ways. And the Black-Eyed Kids are a wonderful example of making it sort of unclear for us where those boundaries lie.
Right. And you know what? At some point, I think the paranormal and ghosts was separate from UFOs, separate from religion, separate from science. And then they all started connecting, which is really fascinating, where one ends and one starts, which is always should be that way, in my opinion. Like stigmata. My God, is it religious or is it freaky paranormal?
There you go. Another great example. And one thing I find fascinating about the idea of religion in general is that for the average person, the idea of religion is the closest they come to the paranormal throughout their day-to-day routine. And most people don't even think of religion as being paranormal, but just about every religion has paranormal aspects and are based on some kind of a spiritual realm at very least.
Right. Like exorcism. Wow. I mean, how do priests get involved with exorcism, and yet it's possessions, it's the devil, Satan? Oh, my God. You know what? I have to tell you something. I was reading your book at the Starbucks during the daylight. And I got so scared. And I kept thinking, you know what? There's no way I'm going to read his book at night. Because your story, which I want to know the true story behind your anthology, I read the introduction that starts with this Jennifer woman. Right there, that freaked me out more than any other story. Wow. So tell me, so you collected these stories, you put them together in one book, and how did you get these stories from people?
Well, it's funny. I've published about 20 books, and 2 of my books are anthologies like this one. And the first time I tried to do a book like this, I was just a teenager, and I went around my region in Asheville, and I put up posters and I ran advertisements saying, hey, have you ever had a real strange experience? I'd like to know about it. And I got great stories that came in, and I put it together into a regional book called Speaking of Strange. And I always thought, someday I'd like to do this on a bigger scale, on a global scale. And finally last year I realized, I think my audience is big enough now. I've been doing this kind of work for over 20 years, and I've had a lot of luck, as you mentioned, getting into the media on television and radio. And so I put together a website that people could submit their stories through. And, I basically I said, it's okay if you're not a writer. Don't be intimidated. We'll have a staff there that can really help with that and polish it up and make them more presentable. And one of the great things about the way this book was assembled is that when you are reading through the book, it's not broken down into this is the ghost chapter, this is the UFO chapter, this is the psychic chapter. You don't know how each story is going to end necessarily as you're reading it, and that makes it a much more realistic way of reliving the experience through the eyes of the person. Because most of the time when somebody has a paranormal experience, they don't know what's happening at the time. It's very confusing. It's not until it's over with that you look back and you say, what the heck just occurred here?
Yeah.
And I think that, a lot of people have been emailing me because, this book hasn't been out long and saying, this has scared me to death, and a lot of them, they say, I will not read this before I go to bed anymore. And, and it really is, I think it kind of, makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck because there is a ring of truth to the ones that I selected for this book. I had probably well over 1,000 of these stories, but the ones that I picked, I felt they had great substance, and also every person put his or her legal name there and is willing to stand up and say this is a true story. And we have stories in here from police officers and people who are work in various fields where their career could be jeopardized by even admitting to these types of things. But it's a wonderful slice of this sort of aspect of the human experience.
And you probably going to have a second book, right?
I certainly could. I've got enough stories to do a second one. So
I'm gonna have Facebook friends. I can actually tell you some of the stories, including this guy who actually saw the UFO as a witness that Don was talking about. And my God, he told me a story which I will share with you if he doesn't call in, because he promised he will.
Okay, great.
During his break.
Yeah. So tell us about that. You know what? I have to tell you, it ended up that Jennifer's story was one of my favorite ones, and I want to ask you what are some of your favorite stories from the book. But tell us about that story of the Jennifer who slept in that big bed.
Yeah. Well, in the introduction to this book, I sort of was explaining the type of story that I was looking for, and that's why, when I was asking for stories, I said, well, let me give everybody kind of an example of the tone that I would like. And one of the stories that has always stood out for me was one that I came across years ago. About a woman who had this very creepy experience in 2002. She lived in Connecticut. She was in her 30s. Another place with a great history of spooky legends and lore. And so she was working at a law firm, and she was looking for a place to rent. And one of her coworkers said, well, I've got a house here that I recently inherited, and you can rent it if you want. It's a big 3-story farmhouse out in the country. But the coworker said, I wouldn't live there because it's haunted. And but she obviously was not deterred by that. So she rented this place, and the first night she was lying in bed by herself in this big dark old house, and she heard footsteps on the staircase. Well, of course, that was pretty spooky, but the rest of the time went okay, except she woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
She just bolted right up out of bed, wide awake, couldn't figure out why. And then the next night, same thing. 2 o'clock in the morning, boom. She
on the dot.
Yeah, exactly at 2 o'clock she would wake up. And so she started talking to her coworkers and saying, I don't know what's going on, but something's waking me up at 2 o'clock. So one of them loaned her a video camera and said, well, just let a video camera run. Let's see what's going on. So she let a video camera roll, and the next day when she watched the video, you can actually see in the green sort of night shot, here she is lying there slumbering away in her bed, and then at 1:58 a.m., this tall, dark, hooded figure actually appears to the left side of the frame, and it just sort of silently glides up to her bedside. It leans over her. This thing looks like the Grim Reaper, and it just quietly watches her until 1:59 a.m., and then it turns and glides away, and at 2 a.m., boom, she shoots up in bed, wild-eyed, and never knowing that for the past minute or so, this being has been there next to her.
Staring at her.
staring at her quietly. And, you know, that kind of experience is not as rare as you might think, because I believe many of these beings, they actually visit us while we energy is nice and dormant and available, and they kind of feed off of our energy.
Well, I am one of the, not activists, but one of the experiencers, unfortunately, of what you're talking about, except it has never been videotaped. I have things that moves on my bed. They have attacked me on my bed. They come toward me. They sit on my face, my body. Oh, my God. It's awful. I have experienced that my whole life. Recently, I started saying twice, in the name of Jesus Christ. And they, all of a sudden, they disappeared. And I'm not even religious. I don't even know why I said it. I just thought that maybe it's international or universal. Yeah. Maybe these recognize the name Jesus Christ. Maybe I should have said
it also needs to do with the power of your intent, that you're taking over. You're saying, I don't accept this, and standing your ground. There's an energy around that.
Right. You might be right. I mean, I could have said the name of my cat, Natasha, and maybe they would have gone away. It's the intent behind it, right? That's what I hear anyways.
Yeah, and of course, certainly whatever these beings are, they presumably have a belief system as well. And so if that name means something to them that even you don't understand, then that might be enough to scare them out of there.
Absolutely. So having said what you said, are there interdimensional, since you actually know quite a bit about this subject, are there interdimensional beings living among us at the same time as us, and what makes them be here, and why can't we see them?
Well, you know, that's a great question, and I do believe there are. As a matter of fact, I guess it's about 7 years ago, I wrote a whole book about non-human apparitions, and most of the book was geared toward animal and sort of Mothman type creatures that are kind of interdimensional weirdies. But one thing I realized as I spent a good 2 years really digging into this subject is that scientifically there is absolutely nothing to suggest that life must exist exclusively at this frequency that you and I consider physical. That physicality itself is a very relative thing. So that is to say that one thing is physical to another if they happen to resonate within a similar frequency range. And at that point, they resist each other. But if two things are dissimilar, they don't interact, which is why right now we have radio waves from all over planet Earth, floating around us and shooting through our bodies, and we're not aware of that directly. We don't feel that. On the other hand, if you were made of a radio wave, well, all these waves around you would be like physical barriers. You couldn't pass through them. And so it seems that if you look at the absolute vastness of the cosmos, and you realize what a tiny little slice that we are able to perceive with our eyes, with our ears, with all of our senses, well then you'd almost think statistically there should be life forms that exist at frequencies that are usually just a little bit outside of our physical one. But conditions can change, so from time to time there are these limited windows of opportunity where we are able to interact and experience each other, that our vibrations are a little higher or theirs are a little lower, and probably some of these beings are more animalistic and some of them are more humanoid. But we have a whole vast, rich history of human tradition and experiences right up to the present day, suggesting that people encounter these other beings all the time. And I believe scientifically we're getting closer and closer to demonstrating that life does exist, is more prevalent at realms beyond the one that we sort of egotistically think is the only one.
That should exist, exactly. That's wow. That gives me chills, by the way, because I have been studying this subject, and I have noticed that
from what you're saying and confirming what you're saying is that they could live among us. We don't see them. We vibrate at a different frequency. If we just raise our vibration, or we can match their vibration, we can see them. Now, some people supposedly see them. Now, why is that? And they see them all the time. Like some people see or hear sounds or see ghosts, or let's say not ghosts, just other beings among us, and they see them regularly. So what do we have to do to why is that?
Well, there are a number of different elements involved in how we perceive things. One of the simplest is to just simply take your cell phone or a digital camera and see how it views the world in a slightly different way. Most digital cameras are able to see the infrared light realm, which is invisible to the naked human eye. And so you can take something like a television TV remote and hit the button on it, and with your naked eye, you don't see any light come out of it. But if you look at that TV remote through your digital camera, you will see the light that comes from it. And that's because, again, the technology for digital cameras, the little CCD unit, is usually naturally sensitive to the infrared realm. And everyone's eyes are slightly unique. The amount of rods and cones that an individual has in his or her eyes is going to determine just how far into the infrared and ultraviolet range that a particular person is able to see. You find that children are able to see more than usually older folks, because as you get older, the lens and other components of the eye become more dense, and there is a smaller band that can travel through. And then, of course, you also have the fact that the brain is the thing that's going to interpret the information that comes in. And interestingly enough, even though I use this example of the eyes perceiving infrared light, I have interviewed a number of people over the years who are blind, who have never been able to see, who have told me that they have been able to see ghosts. And so, so in some cases it seems like that this is a phenomenon that very much goes right to the core of your brain's ability to mentally perceive information. And I think that also explains why that some people experience ghosts in different ways. I've been on investigations, for example, where I've been in, say, a haunted mansion, and all of a sudden something paranormal will occur, and one person will see some kind of a misty form. The next person won't see anything, but that person will hear some kind of a weird noise or a voice. The next person will not see or hear anything, but will actually feel a sensation as if he or she is touched. And they're all sort of having a simultaneous experience, but they're picking up different elements of this experience. And so that's one thing that makes this so complicated. It's hard to isolate the variables of a human's unique senses in some kind of a repeatable, controlled laboratory setting.
So that's what it takes. That's basically what it takes for people to. People are so different from each other, but it seems like everyone has some experience with ghosts, or they see something. But they just have to really be open to it, because a lot of people who are, I think, possibly religious, they close themselves down to their own sights and intuitions.
Yeah, and that's very weird, because growing up in Asheville, North Carolina, that's literally where Billy Graham lives. There are churches on every corner, and now the area has become more and more diversified. But, originally I was exposed to the Southern Baptist belief system, and then as I got older, I started visiting different churches and learning about different religions, and I found it odd that, no matter what church or what sort of mainstream religion that you go to, the people are very open and willing to believe an amazing paranormal phenomena within their literature, with people coming back from the dead, or objects levitating, or people being able to communicate telepathically, but for some reason they separate that in their own minds from the phenomenon that we're talking about, just because it's not within the context of their scripture, and yet it's the same type of thing that's happening.
Right. I agree with you. And not to talk about my brother-in-law who's Mormon and believe me, they believe in a lot of stuff that is very paranormal, but they do laugh at me when I talk about UFOs, for sure. I mean, every time. It's a comedy around there when they know what I do. Okay, I wanted to kind of ask you, why do you particularly call ghosts, UFOs, cryptids, and other interdimensional beings paratemporals?
Yeah, that's really a wonderful way of sort of approaching that concept we were talking about regarding the connection between these beings. I wrote a book several years ago called The Secret Wisdom of Kukulkan, and in that book, Kukulkan being the Mayan deity, which symbolized a lot of strange things, changes that were meant to occur in the future, and I was looking for one simple kind of generic term that I could use for my own convenience to describe, ghosts, UFOs, aliens, Bigfoot, Mothman, interdimensional, one term, so that when I was writing, I wouldn't have to use all those separate terms to get the point across. But in order for me to do that, I thought, well, what is the one thing that these all actually may have in common, if anything? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized if you break it down, the thing they all seem to have in common is time-oriented anomalies. Uh-huh. And so I'll sort of explain more about how that is. Well, when it comes to ghosts, of course, that's easy to understand because often ghosts are some kind of reflection from the past, or you're seeing the spirit of somebody who supposedly died. That's an easy one. When it comes to UFOs,
you often have these stories, like the typical one where, some guy's driving down the road, and maybe a UFO flies overhead, and his truck will stop working, and then the UFO flies away, and the truck starts working again. He doesn't have to turn the ignition. It's not like the truck died. It was as if, like you said, time stopped. There was some kind of pause in the time continuum.
It's a missing time, and that's so often.
Yeah. And then when it comes to cryptids like, Bigfoot or these other type of weird beings, of course you have again and again somebody following one of these beings, and then the being just vanishes. And you even have cases where they're following a whole path of footprints, and all of a sudden the footprints just stop in mid-path. And so it's almost like that these beings have somehow teleported away or have dramatically changed their position in space. And since we know that space and time are connected as separate facets of the same thing, well, there again you have time. And then, of course, that's easy to also understand when it comes to psychic phenomena. So, therefore, it seemed like the idea of the paratemporal made sense, because para means beyond and temporal is time, and so these are all beings that seem to somehow function within a realm that is outside the human normal temporal experience. So paratemporal is a good catch-all term.
That's good. That's good. So you came up with this term yourself?
Yes. Yeah,
that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, on the same subject, pretty much, what is the best current model of the ghostly realms?
Yeah, this is something I'm really interested in discussing, because what I'm finding more and more is that, fortunately, some of these things that have been almost inconceivable or incomprehensible to humans for centuries are coming into focus as we watch how our technology develops. And the ghostly phenomena, I believe, gives us an interesting model for how reality functions around us in general. So that is to say, you know how if you go to Walmart and you buy some item, they have these little RFID chips that they often will stick on the packaging. And these are, radio frequency ID chips, and they are actually passive, meaning that they don't produce any type of electrical broadcast themselves. However, as you walk out of the store, well, there is an electrical signal, a field that beams into them, and at that point the chip kind of wakes up and activates, and then it starts sending information back out. So it's passive, but it's potentially active. You just need that other energy to sort of shine on them. And it seems like that much of the ghostly activity that people experience may sort of operate in a similar fashion. That is to say, maybe most, if not all, of the incidents that have occurred throughout history are actually encoded within the environment around us, and that information is just sitting there passively. And most people might be able to walk right past it and never even perceive it. But there are certain people whose consciousness, we shall say, is at a certain frequency, so that when it shines upon that information, it reawakens it. And that information starts transmitting back. And so they are able to see some of these incidents from the past. It's almost like their brains are providing the light for the projector that brings them back to life.
Right. It awakens it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this would explain also why that, much of the ghostly activity is very, very personalized to a particular individual. That's why it's a little different for everybody. You do have those different cases where you have what appears to be an entity, which is some kind of a being that is interactive and unpredictable and aware, that actually seems like some living conscious spirit from a dead individual. But most ghostly activity is not. Most ghostly activity is redundant, and it's predictable, and it's very much like a scene from the past being replayed.
Oh, interesting. So basically there is a difference between ghost and an entity.
Yeah, I would consider that two different categories within ghosts. So there are basically two types of ghosts, entities and imprints. And I wrote a book once called How to Hunt Ghosts, which was pretty popular when it came out. And in that one, I tried to sort of break ghosts down and into different categories. And those are the two big ones. And because one thing to keep in mind is that if a ghost is simply the spirit of the dead, well then why would a ghost not be naked when he or she comes back if it's just some kind of a remnant of the organic? Well, there's more to it. And you occasionally do have naked ghosts, which could be particularly spooky for some people. That's right. And but most of the time they have clothes on. Also, you have to consider that there are plenty of ghosts of inanimate objects. I mean, you have ghost ships and ghost cars and ghost stagecoaches. So I think a lot of times when we have ghosts of things that were inanimate, it's because that we're actually seeing something like a big holographic 3D IMAX movie that's been sort of trapped there. And to me, that's one of the big rewards for understanding how ghostly phenomena operates. If we understand this process, there may come a day when we can create a machine like a camera that will literally allow us to look back through history and review incidents as they actually occurred. And this would be a profound invention that would make almost an unimaginable impact on our culture and our beliefs. And yet you have to think, and this is an interesting concept, if that is possible, then maybe we right now are actually being observed by people in the future. And if you've ever had this...
God.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be trippy. Please, go on.
So if you've ever had this feeling that maybe, somebody's watching you all the time and you almost feel like the star of your own little Truman Show, it could be because,
somebody is.
You were all being observed. We are entertainment for people in the future, and maybe that's what some of these references are about us being, all judged someday, and all things will be known, and there will be no secrets, that sort of thing.
I wanted to ask you, because we're going to go on a break already in like maybe 5 or 6 minutes. When we come back, I want to talk about ghost pictures, ghost photos. But before we go on a break, can you tell us one of your favorite ghost stories in the book?
Absolutely. And there are so many great ones, but one that just comes, first to mind here is a story from 1997. It took place in Minnesota. A couple moved into a small house in a nice, quaint neighborhood, and everything was normal the first few days, and then one morning they woke up and went into the bathroom and found a butcher knife in the bathtub.
Oh, yes, I read that one.
Yeah, and of course they could not figure out why there was a butcher knife in the bathtub. This, on the other hand, continued to happen a number of times over the next 3 years, until finally one day they threw a big party and they invited some of their neighbors over, and this subject came up, and that's when one of the neighbors said, well, you do know, don't you, that in the 1960s the woman who owned your house committed suicide in the bathtub with a butcher knife.
Yes. And isn't that also true that the butcher knife actually ended up in the bedroom too?
Yeah, I think it popped up in a number of weird places, so that's even spookier.
I know, and it was all these utensils.
So was it butcher knife for their own cupboard?
Yeah, it was. It was their own butcher knife, at least. So.
Yeah, it wasn't from 1900. But that is very creepy. Yeah. That was actually one of my favorite too.
I like that one because it has all the elements. You could almost tell that one around a campfire and it would work. It sounds like something that was invented, but apparently it's true. So.
Well, but Joshua, what is the message here? What is she trying to tell the couple? Because it's not true that sometimes the ghosts really maybe they were killed by a butcher knife and the body was never found. Maybe it was buried behind the walls. What does she want from the couple, do you think? I'm sure maybe it's just a story that in the book, but what do you think?
Well, it seems to me that most of the time when a person dies and he or she sort of chooses to stick around, it's because that person has a guilty conscience. And what I mean by that is, just imagine for a moment, if you die and there's a nice big tunnel of light like we see in the movies, and you can go through that light or not, it doesn't matter whether or not there is some God waiting to judge you on the other side. If you believe there might be, and you have a guilty conscience, you might try to delay the process of meeting that God for a little while. And so people can stick around here because they're afraid of moving on. And a lot of times you get dark people who have a shady past. That gives them that guilty conscience. And then you also have people here who they're determined to get some message across. And it could have simply been her desire for some acknowledgement of who she was and the history that she had with that property.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. Just a quick question, just in case we get cut off by the break. Is that true that some people hear the ghost, some people see the ghost, some people smell, or the temperature in the room drops and it becomes cold? And so,
yeah,
does it happen to everyone? I mean, do everybody has this kind of gifts, or just some people?
Well, I myself have experienced all of those things at one point or another. And mind you, I started investigating ghosts full time for 6 years before I ever actually saw a ghost. That shows you how rare it is. But, yeah, those are all ways you can experience a ghost, and we can talk about each of them later after the break if you'd like.
Well, welcome back to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. My name is Monique Lessan, the host of Private Eye Matrix Revealed. And again, I want to just remind everyone that Revolution Radio is the only 100% listener supported. So please go to our website, freedomslips.com, and click donate. You support all of us when you do that. Tonight I'm talking to the author of It Was a Dark and Creepy Night, Joshua Warren. And welcome back again with me, Joshua.
Well, thank you.
Yes, and we were speaking about ghosts. We were definitely speaking about ghosts in pictures. And I'm just wondering, what is it that, why? I mean, well, let's just ask you this. What's the story behind your own project called World's Wildest Ghost Photos?
Yeah, this was something I really had fun with. Every year, I examine, on average, close to 1,000 paranormal photos. And, of course, that includes all the different sort of categories. But most of them end up being ghost-type photographs. And of course, most of them can be explained. And it's very easy for people to mistake reflections and cigarette smoke or fog or dust. I mean, these are all things that you often see. But once in a while, you see something that kind of blows your mind. And at that point, I feel it's important to sort of follow up and try to find the photographer and interview him or her and get the specifics directly from the individual who captured it. In fact, you probably know this yourself, Monique, but now you have these apps out there you can download that come with a pre-manufactured full-bodied ghost apparition that you can just stick into your photo for fun, So
okay,
that's one of the things that we struggle with is some of the people who are just have the funny thing is that, we can look at those menus and we can go inside and we can determine which ones are available for the general public. So that makes it easy for us to determine those are hoaxes. But it also just brings in a greater volume of stuff in general because a lot of people don't know the difference. Usually somebody will contact me and say, hey, my daughter's friend who goes to another school district has a cousin whose boyfriend went to a cemetery one night. It's one of those things, right? So that's why it's very important for me to track down the original photographer. And I sat down at one point and I thought, after over 20 years of looking at so many pictures, what would I consider to be the world's wildest ghost photos? Meaning the ones that seem to be the most impressive, not just because they show something that's very clear, but also because they seem to be credible. And I put a gallery together, which is on my website, joshuapwarren.com. There's no period after the P. But if you go to joshuapwarren.com and scroll down, you'll see a section there, World's Wildest Ghost Photos. It's all free, of course. And you can go through and you can look at these various images. In some cases, I even have video clips, and I especially, of course, am impressed by these full-bodied apparitions. Some of the best ones were actually captured by people that I know, and so that makes a huge impact. But what I was kind of curious, though, because as I started looking over all these, I realized that the vast majority of them come from North America and Europe. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering, like, well, why is that? Because we have these giant populations in places like India or Asia, Africa. Why don't we have more pictures from these highly populated places? And I started thinking, well, of course, maybe there's some bias on my part because I speak English and I'm just not as aware of those other communities of ghost researchers. But then I started realizing that there actually is not as much discussion about ghosts in some of these other countries and spirits of that kind as there is in North America and Europe. And I wondered, why is that? And I understood it's because that in many of those other cultures, they accept the spiritual realm and ghosts as being real. And
right. I mean, I was going to say that, like in Africa, and they have a huge belief in not a ghost. It's another realm for them.
Yeah,
and acceptable. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So when you believe something is real, you're not searching for it. It's like it's there
not
already.
Paranormal. It
Absolutely.
really is not paranormal. It's normal to them.
Exactly. And we are making a big deal out of it because, we have this, we pretend to be these skeptical scientific type people who demand proof for everything and are all critical of each other. And so that's why we make a bigger deal out of pushing evidence forth in North America and Europe, whereas, ironically, the rest of the world actually has a much more open, accepting attitude to the reality of all this, and so it's not as shocking to them. It's not like a big deal to them when some kind of evidence is produced.
Right. Well, I have in a different realm now. Here, I'm stuck with that word myself now. Let's talk about UFOs. Since at the beginning of the show we talked about UFOs, I want to now share with you what the story was that this man told me about, and I must introduce you to my producer again, Joe Kiernan, who has witnessed some lights last night.
Mm-hmm.
Joe, tell us about your lights you saw. You are pretty famous, Joe. You know you are. So, are you there, Joe Kiernan? Joe Kiernan? He's shy. I don't want to tell you. But Joe has actually taken photographs and videotaped these UFO lights last night.
Wow.
Which I wanted him to share with you if he could. But
maybe
I will tell
he's
you,
working on something.
He might be.
Yeah.
He might come back and tell us more about it because he did film this light. But this man that I met just a few nights ago, who witnessed these UFO lights, told me about an experience that I have to share just in case you want to include it in your book, in the next book.
Yeah.
He had a dream just a couple nights before I met him, and he was being abducted by aliens everywhere in his room. And in fact, he woke up and it was exactly 3 o'clock in the morning. And as you know, 3 o'clock, 3:33, is the time for the UFO abductions. Interestingly enough, he got really scared, rushed to his mother's room, who shared with him that she just had a dream of, guess what? Being abducted by aliens.
Wow.
So how is it that the mother and son both have a dream at the same time, same night, at the same hour, but being abducted by aliens?
Well, there's something so special about what happens to us when we sleep. When we sleep, our energy bodies actually become more available and more accessible. And we actually touched on this earlier when it comes to ghostly type beings that might appear and try to feed on you. But that actually applies in a very physiological sense to alien and UFO abduction scenarios as well. And that is because it seems like that these beings that we frequently refer to as aliens they understand so much about the relationship between matter and energy, which is what allows them to arrive here from wherever they're from, however far away it may be, whether that's in terms of distance or dimensions, that they are able to interact with us sometimes on what we consider the astral plane, even more than the physical. Mm-hmm. So it seems like that that's one of the reasons that they are also so difficult for us to sort of pin down in just a strictly mechanical sense. And therefore, many of the strongest sort of alien encounters seem to happen when the body is sleeping and the astral body becomes more available, and these beings will come and they'll visit you on the astral plane. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think most of abduction probably happens. It probably is the astral body that's being abducted, and then there are physical marks that are left. But in many cases, you could probably walk into the bedroom of an abducted person and find that their physical body is there, but astrally they are not there, and then that's where the incident's happening, and maybe that's what occurred to this gentleman and his mother.
Yes. That is very interesting. I interviewed Denise Stoner. I don't know if you know Kathleen Martin, the relative of Bonnie and Betty and Barney abductions. Mm-hmm. And she does a lot of abduction cases for MUFON. She's been on my show 3 times. And I had Denise Stoner. They wrote a book together, and Denise was saying that she actually physically was taken through the walls of her bedroom, which I thought that was fascinating. And also Robert Salas. I don't know if you know Robert Salas, who was the person, it's kind of hard for me to talk about it actually, because he's going to be on my show again. He was involved with when the UFOs ended up outside of oh, God, Don, help me out here. What was it? Do you remember?
They were the ones that deactivated the missile silos, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I kind of.
He is, man.
Yes.
He was working on the project when they started deactivating multiple nuclear missiles, and the military started reacting, but not being able to do anything.
That's exactly right. Thank you. So Robert Salas was laying next to his wife when he told me that he also had the abduction experience as the aliens showed up in the house. The wife actually saw the same thing, but she was not taken. Robert Salas was taken right through the window. Now, I'm not quite sure if he feels like he's physically gone or his body stayed on the bed while spirit was taken, like you were talking about, the astral.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I find really interesting about what we can now deduce from technology is that we have cameras everywhere now. I mean, that's why, you can sit down and you watch the news and some kind of crime has been committed, and usually there's some camera that they can go to, some kind of a traffic cam or some security cam at a gas station that has captured it, right?
Yeah.
There are cameras everywhere, and yet I have still not seen one piece of video footage of a physical body being transported out of a window or through a roof or something like that into a UFO. So it must be very rare for it to happen physically, because you would have more evidence.
I have a comment kind of tying together what you were saying earlier, Joe, about, about the ghosts and that they're energetic. If you were put into the astral plane and taken on an experience like that, you might not be able to tell the difference between physicality, a physical window, or whether it's actually your body or not. You can't tell if your body's with you because you might feel things, experience things.
I agree entirely, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And personally, having experienced an out-of-body experience myself as a child, I remember how real it seemed until I realized that if I had a body, my body would have been in the seat from where I was looking. It was a car seat, and I was watching people. So the other part about it is we talk about spirits, and we always have this assumption from childhood that if there's a ghost or spirit, it has to be the actual spirit of that person. They have to be there. And from all the work that Monique's doing and talking with different experts in these areas, spirits can actually coexist in different areas. We have many different forms or levels of energy, so that, as you're saying, there's some things can be a succubus where they come and take some of your energy or feed off your energy or respond to them. And then when you flip that energy, Monique, in a powerful way and say, no, not going to happen, you take over, you come back into your power. So if you see
I can imagine that could be true, yeah.
Right, so it could be a fragment of that person's energy. It could be an echo of their energy. It could be the echo or the energetic echo of the event, like he says, inanimate objects, ships.
Yeah.
It could be transporting or waffling between these very strange and sort of flexible walls of quantum time and dimensions and different energies, and as you say, astral planes. We tend to think of things in a linear fashion, only one frame at a time. Physics is just starting to talk about fifth dimension, eighth level dimensions, things like this. Yeah. And they're also talking about bending time and warps and tubes coming back to itself. So the mind is opening up to the possibilities. But I'd say that these things can be not one and the same. They can be many experiences and many vibrations.
Right. And what do you think?
What do you think?
Joshua, what do you think?
Joshua.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, one interesting thing about the physics, and what even, some of the best cosmologists are telling us as well, is that mathematically, they seem pretty confident that, A, we've got maybe at least up to 11 different dimensions, and B, even though we think we know a lot about the universe, everything that we know is only able to explain 5% of what we can observe. The other 95% is full of dark matter or dark energy, which is defined by the very fact that we don't know what it is. So statistically, we really don't know what the heck is going on here in this universe that we can see. But we do tend to feel confident right now that there are at least these 11 different dimensions, and therefore we can, I think, easily presume that since human beings are a part of this world just like anything else, that humans must exist in all these different dimensions. So that is to say that I certainly exist in these three dimensions that someone perceives when he or she walks through the door and sees me, but I am also at this moment simultaneously existing in 8 other dimensions at least, and maybe even more than that. And so if every one of us is existing at any moment in many, many different dimensions, then that would explain why that we can have a lot of different experiences in these different dimensions, but not always, and not even be aware of it. I mean, it's just like the reason that the subconscious exists, to regulate your breathing and to regulate your body temperature and all these things that you don't consciously think about. So, maybe at this very moment, a part of us is experiencing the paranormal, but we're all focused on doing a radio show, so that conscious part of it, of us, is not aware of it.
Right. It's very interesting because I did have, I tell you, I did a pendulum without protecting myself first, about this 2-year-old boy that got kidnapped in Brazil, and I felt like he came back as dead. And I was, all of a sudden, my entire house got full of spirits. I went to sleep. I was attacked. It was so strange. Anyways, which bring me to the subject of demons. Do you believe in angels and demons?
I actually do, and for a long time, I wasn't sure how to address that topic because, there are so many different definitions that carry religious baggage, and so it kind of, varied. It was a tricky territory, but what I finally concluded is that essentially, however one sort of places we'll start with demons, places a demon into context, is some kind of a parasitic entity. one of these things that feeds off of you and drains your life energy. So you can kind of look at it like this. Every single one of us has to get energy somehow, and for most of us that means, well, you put a physical piece of a plant or an animal in your mouth, and then you chew it up and you swallow it. But ultimately, what you're doing is just getting that energy. We just have to go through this kind of, crude process of breaking it down. Well, there's no reason we should think that it's impossible for more, say, advanced beings that are in better harmony with their environment to go and directly sort of absorb that energy. And so in cases like, the beings that might come up and slip into our bedrooms and feed off of us a little bit while we sleep, that might be something that's subtle enough that it doesn't make a big impact. But what if there are beings out there that are parasitic creatures, and they find a good candidate and just latch right on? And whenever you're dealing with a parasite of any kind, even if it's a little parasitic worm, the idea is to keep the host alive as long as possible, but eventually, if nothing is done, the host will die. And so if there are beings out there that are feeding off of our energy, you're going to go through a series of symptoms. The first thing is you're going to start becoming tired, and that's going to lead to you becoming irritable, and then that's going to lead toward you having poor judgment and making bad decisions, and it continues to spiral until people say, this person is not the same person that I knew a year ago.
Yes.
Which is where this idea of possession comes from.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it may not necessarily be that the person is literally possessed. It's just that the person is now not behaving or in the same way because this person is not healthy and not perceiving the world the same way. And eventually this person will again probably die one way or another because they're going to make some kind of reckless decision. This is why a lot of suicides probably happen, because people become very depressed and they don't understand why. And it's because they're being fed upon. And so, therefore, to me, that would be a demonic entity. And I've never seen with my own naked eyes what I would consider a demon. Right. But I've talked to plenty of people who have. Mm-hmm. And if their experiences are accurate, well, these beings are very, very dense creatures mm-hmm. in their own frequency, which is why they block out light and they look very dark.
And what frequency is that? Is that among us? Is that
they would be
yes.
a little lower.
I'm sorry. I wanted to ask you one more question in the same regard. Do the people that see demons, or do you connect demons or demonic with religion?
Well, certainly I think that all throughout history, the idea of the demonic and the angelic have played a role in most religions because people have had experiences with them. On the other hand, we see how easy it is to sort of abuse religious concepts and to misconstrue them and misinterpret them. And so I try to avoid that religious interpretation just because
exactly. Just wanted to clarify with you.
It is so easy for it to be distorted, and so I try to base it more upon what we learn from eyewitnesses.
Okay, so where do these demons live, really? You said in a different frequency. What frequency?
Well, really right here in our own realm, just like that, they're going back to radio waves or gamma rays that are coming in from outer space. Those are all occupying the same three-dimensional space, so to speak. but they are at a frequency in a world which is completely different from ours. Which it's interesting to me. You have incidents throughout history. Say, for example, when when the X-ray was discovered, or the microwave was discovered. Well, X-rays and microwaves have always been here, but it just took a point where finally a human had a tool that allowed
to capture.
Yeah, allowed the perception of that, to document it, and then once you document something, you can start using it.
Sure.
And so to me, it seems like that if we ask this question of like what is the spiritual realm in general, and where is the spiritual realm, it's kind of like asking the question, where is the internet? Because the internet is a stream of information that's constantly flowing and changing every single moment. Now, at any moment in time, you can hit the print button on your computer, and it will take that information and lock an image of that into a physical representation, which comes out on a piece of paper. And that's sort of the relationship between the mind and the body. The mind and the personality is the stream of information, and the body is the printout. And that's why.
Well said.
Thank you. So that's why you're changing every single moment, even if we call it the aging process. We're not the same people that we were 60 seconds ago, 10 seconds ago, 1 second ago. We're constantly changing. And therefore, it seems to me we have to look even at the internet as something like a very, very basic model for what reality is in general. And getting back to your own, sort of a matrix concept, eventually we're probably going to find that this reality we live in is a big matrix. And that we just get little physical representations from time to time, but the information has always been there, will always be there. And that we are, in fact, infinite beings.
Right. And demons, could they possibly be also ETs interjecting or influencing us during our sleep or our mind? We don't know how they do influence us. Could they be considered extraterrestrials?
Oh, sure. Well, I've always been happy to tell people that, right now, if all of a sudden a little green man, appeared and ran through my living room, I might say, "Oh my gosh, an alien ran through here." But if I'd been living 200 years ago, I might say, "Oh my gosh, a leprechaun ran through here." So it really just sort of depends on your point of view, and obviously, we are now so familiar with the appearance of the alien, especially the typical gray alien, that you can stop any child on the street and show them a picture of an alien, and they know what it is, and they'll probably even smile and laugh about it. But 100 years ago, if an alien appeared, that would be a demon. This is a little weird-looking creature that
shapeshifter.
Yeah, exactly. That abducts people. A very frightening experience for anybody at any point in time, but so frightening that I think demonic would have been a very appropriate term for them then, and it may still be now.
Right, absolutely. Especially the other side of the aliens being the reptilians, they definitely look demonic. But what about angels? How do you define angels? And it seems like people define angels by believing in God in the first place. And if you don't believe in God, then you could just call the angels extraterrestrials.
Right. Well, it seems to me that if we're going to sort of try to define demons as beings that take energy from you and are very selfish and harmful towards you, angels would essentially be the opposite. These would be beings that have evolved to a state where they realize that by helping you and by giving you healing energy, it actually is going to help them more. Now, what I mean by that is, okay, let's take some type of a creature like a dog that has less judgment than a human. If a hungry dog is walking through an alleyway and sees a nice piece of meat, that dog is probably going to run over without thinking twice and eat that meat. And if that meat happens to be poisoned or something like that, well, then the dog can die because the dog didn't have the capacity to understand that. On the other hand, let's look at how humans view our food. We get together and we collectively we grow food, we process it, we try to test it, we put it through all kinds of checks, and therefore most of the time in advanced countries, when you go and you eat food, you don't get sick, and that's because we've realized that by helping each other have a better existence, then we are ultimately helping ourselves grow as a collective society, which is good for everybody. So it's
sure.
It's kind of this understanding that what's good for you is good for me. Nobody lives in a bubble. If your house catches on fire and I don't do anything about it, eventually that fire may spread and burn my house down as well. Mm-hmm. And so angels tend to be a more advanced version of that. These are beings that have evolved enough to realize that by helping us out, they are helping themselves out as well, because we all live in the same world. And so generally these would be beings who, as far as we're concerned, are kind and helpful because they tend to have our best interests in mind. But being creatures just like any others, again, it's because they are intelligent enough to understand it's good for them as well. And I even have a free audio book called The Angels and Demons Beside You, in which I dig deeply into this category. And on my website, joshuapwarren.com, there's a section you can click called Audiobooks that's got a breakdown of that information.
Oh, great. I actually definitely want to get that. Well, because I often wonder about that. Are we listening to the voice of the demons or angels when we make a decision? And do they really help us make a decision from, for example, proceeding across the street? And what if going across the street was my destiny in the first place, and how could an angel stop me from going? Or did the demon or other demonic voices actually push me through it? I mean, it's so difficult to tell.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we also have to sort of be mindful of when it comes to how egocentric we are. You mentioned the reptilians, for example, and, there are people out there, most famously people like David Icke, who suggest that we may be food, literally being, fed upon by reptilian beings. And a lot of people just laugh at that and blow it off. But there are two things that come to mind when I think of that. Number one, if that were true, that would actually be one of the easiest secrets in the world to keep because nobody believes it. And number two, I bet you there's not a single cow on planet Earth that realizes people eat cows. And so why should we think that we are so wise and so omniscient that we would be any different if there were something here that was a species a little smarter than we are that actually is eating us? So, I don't just dismiss that sort of thing out of hand, but we are constantly having to reassess our perspective and the amount of importance we place upon ourselves when we're trying to perceive these much more elaborate and advanced concepts of what's possible in this mysterious universe.
And while we're on the subject of angels and demons, do you have one of the stories, your favorite stories, to share with us by any chance in the book?
Yeah, I do. There's a story from 1972 which took place in Michigan. It's a very simple story, but I think it kind of captures a lot of the things that we're talking about here. A little boy has a horrible dreamlike experience in the middle of the night where he is being attacked by this demonic, beastly creature, goes running into his mom and dad's bedroom screaming. They calm him down, tell him it was just a bad dream, that whole routine, and then he lifts up his shirt, and guess what? There are claw marks all over his body.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the mother says, I remember this one too, because she says, no, you're just dreaming, or something like this, and the boy lifts up his shirt and says, do dreams do this? Right?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
See, I memorize stories, whatever I read.
Oh, well, I need to hire you to promote this book. There's a lot to remember in this book, and they're all great stories, and also, all over the place. But I have actually investigated cases where people get these physical marks on them when they say they've been attacked, and I've seen some of these things appear practically right before my eyes. And so it does seem like that there are certain circumstances where the interaction can be very physical.
Yes. Oh, my God. That is absolutely so true. I will tell you after the show something. Okay. But because we only have half an hour, I want to actually, we have less than half an hour, and I have a couple questions that I'm still very interested to know. Tell me about the Bermuda Triangle research base in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where I am right now.
Oh, you are?
Yep, I'm still here. I'm going to be actually heading back to Asheville, where I have my museum for the fall. I'll be heading back this weekend. But of course, you mentioned at the beginning of the show that I tend to divide my time between Asheville and here. But this year I've done a lot of traveling around the country in general, and I've been spending a lot of time here because we've been doing a lot of experiments and getting some great results. But the Bermuda Triangle Research Base is in Boquerón, Puerto Rico. We're right next to the beautiful beach here. It's just a fantastic place to do research. And here are some things about Puerto Rico most people don't realize. In my opinion, for its size, Puerto Rico has more paranormal activity per square foot than just about anywhere else in the world. And I've traveled a good deal searching for these spots. Puerto Rico is shaped like a horizontal rectangle. And from left to right, it is 100 miles, and from top to bottom, it's about 35 miles. And yet, within this size island, when it comes to UFOs, well, you have, of course, the Arecibo Observatory here, which is the largest radio satellite dish on planet Earth. You might think of it as Earth's telephone to the cosmos. And you've got, of course, it was included in or featured in the movie Contact with Jodie Foster.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of UFO and USO activity happens here. As far as ghosts are concerned, well, you have Old San Juan here, which is the oldest city in U.S. territory, and plenty of ghost stories that go along with that. When it comes to cryptids, well, this is the birthplace of the chupacabra in the rainforest here.
I hear a background voice.
Yeah, I'm getting a little bit of an echo there on my end as well.
I actually went to Arecibo as a kid, Monique, and it's a huge antenna built inside Mountain Valley.
Yeah. Oh, well, and of course, the antennas always seem to draw a lot of UFO phenomena, and then you have places here where you have miracles and psychic phenomena. You've got a lot of natural wonders. You have 3 of the Earth's full-time bioluminescent bays here. It's a fascinating place, but dynamically, especially from a geologic standpoint, it's almost unbeat because in the middle of the island you have mountains that are over 4,000 feet tall. And then just a few miles off the coast, you have the Puerto Rico Trench, the deepest point in the Atlantic Ocean, the second deepest point on Earth, which is almost 30,000 feet deep. So you could almost fit Mount Everest down inside this trench. And the reason I'm telling you all this is that if you take all those variables and you put them together, it's very, I think, easy to demonstrate how odd this place is. if you look at some of the maps that NASA produces, which illustrate the inconsistency of the Earth's gravitational field. And as a side note, a lot of people don't realize that, for example, a clock in your basement runs slower than a clock in your attic because the one in your basement is closer to the gravitational field. Obviously, it's very minute, but there is a difference. So when you look at a map of Earth, the red sections are the places where gravity is stronger, and blue is where it's weaker. This whole section here that we call the Bermuda Triangle is blue. It's got a very weak gravitational field, and the island of Puerto Rico is the bluest of the blue. It's so blue you actually cannot even see the island on the color-coded map. Wow. So at this moment, I am speaking to you from a place with extremely low gravity. Now, we don't understand exactly what that means because we still don't even know exactly what gravity is. It seems to be a very separate type of phenomenon from the other forces, but it clearly makes some kind of an impact on not only how certain instrumentation functions, but also how the human mind functions and how we're able to perceive things. And maybe even it gives that little edge to the beings that might somehow want to slip in and out between this site and other dimensions. And so what we have here is a hot spot. It's a warp. It's sort of a phantasmagoria of many different paranormal phenomena. And so when I'm down here, I am studying all that stuff and getting a lot of bang for my buck because just about every day something weird and paranormal is documented here. And I'm using this as a wonderful little natural laboratory to learn more about how all these things connect. Oh, are you there, Monique?
Yeah, just if we may have lost her for a moment.
Oh, okay.
So, are you, as the public there in Puerto Rico, aware? How do people find you?
Well, of course, I'm always posting information at joshuapwarren.com. I also have a website, which is paranormalpuertorico.com. And from time to time, people come down here and take expeditions. So I actually will go out in the field with equipment and take them to hot spots, and we'll break out third-generation night vision, and we'll do UFO watches at night, and then we'll go out on a boat during the day, and we'll measure these weird gravitational and magnetic anomalies, and it's just, amazing the stuff that you can accomplish in just a week or less here because there's so much weirdness in such a small area.
And how long do you usually stay there when you do come there?
Well, since I've got a house here now, sometimes I'll stay, 6, 7, 8 months. I mean, I've been here the better part of a year. It's so nice, for one thing.
Yes, I can imagine. From what you explained, it makes me want to come and just visit.
Yeah, well, you should certainly do it because I'm telling you, it's one of the most beautiful places on Earth, and the weather here is always great. The water is crystal clear and warm, and I love to go snorkeling. And so it's a very enjoyable place to conduct research, and I'm lucky that it's so paranormally active here.
Let me ask either of you, either of you have the radio on at the same time as the show?
Yeah, I don't have anything on, but I can hear myself in the background somewhere.
And Don, what about you?
No, I don't, of course.
No. Okay, I'm not quite sure.
I don't know either.
All of a sudden you got better. Let's continue. Just so you know, I'm definitely interested in your research base, actually, the Bermuda Triangle, which is so fascinating to me in the first place. And I will take you up on your offer of coming to visit your research base and just to see what it is exactly you do. I may have to do a live radio show from there.
Well, that's certainly a possibility because that's obviously where I am right now, but I will be the rest of this year, most of it probably, in Asheville, where I have my mystery museum, and I'll be doing lots of ghost hunts and investigations, so that's another place you will definitely want to visit as well.
Well, tell me about that. I mean, what is it? How did you get started with that? What is it that you are presenting? And are you bringing anything from Puerto Rico to present at your museum?
I certainly am. In fact, I just shipped some stuff out today that it's going to kind of blow people's minds a little bit. Whenever I come back, because sometimes I travel to really exotic places. I've been to Transylvania and Romania and investigated all of Vlad the Impaler's castles at night, and then of course the Mayan ruins in South America and the Tower of London, etc.
Do you know Peter Moon by any chance?
I know who he is, but I've never met him. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because he's done a lot of research and, the whole Montauk Project books and Transylvania and so forth. Yeah, I just was wondering if you knew each other. Okay.
Yeah.
Go on.
And so I'm always out there. I kind of feel like Robert Ripley sometimes. I want to find something cool to bring back to the museum. And so I have at least 3 things that I am bringing back to debut there this October. Mm-hmm. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to be breaking this right now on your show because I haven't talked about this yet. The first 2 things are certainly exciting. The third one is going to sort of blow people away. The first thing I have is a really, really well-made big spiritual wand from a Santero down here that's very, very well respected, and he says it has a living spirit within it. And so we're bringing this Santeria wand back. I also have a crystal skull in the shape of an alien that was given to me down here. I don't at this point want to say exactly where I got it from, but I took this to some of the biggest hot spots in the Bermuda Triangle, and people who actually approach this thing say that they feel something so powerful, some people can't even get near it. So that'll be in the museum. And the third thing, I got a call from a guy who is a friend of mine, and he says, "Joshua, I've got something I think you might want for your museum." I said, "Okay, what's?" And he said, "I have a chupacabra head."
Oh my God! Oh God! How did he get it?
There was a big flap of sightings, of chupacabra sightings, in this one town not far from the El Yunque rainforest. Mm-hmm. And right around that point in time, some kids went underneath a house and they found this very weird dead body, and nobody could identify what it was. And so I now am in possession of the skull of this thing, and it will be put on display in the museum for the fall, and we'll get lots of opinions on what this may be. I've got a few other interesting things as well, but my museum is in the basement of the Asheville Masonic Temple. So this is a big, grand 4-story building, and it's over 100 years old. It's a haunted building. And when you go down to the basement, it looks like a dungeon there, and you would not believe some of the wild stuff that I brought back.
My favorite place.
Yeah, maybe.
Right after Puerto Rico. No, I'm not kidding. Really. I mean, what you're describing about your museum is fascinating. So it's called Mystery Museum because you travel around the world and you bring these incredible artifacts.
That's right. And, of course, I wrote the very first book of Asheville ghost stories called Haunted Asheville about 20 years ago. And I started, of course, doing tours and things like that in the town. And so over time, I realized that it would be nice to have some space where I could actually show some of the old articles and documents, and this sort of grew and expanded. And now in this museum is far beyond just stuff from Asheville. As a matter of fact, I even have a 4-foot-tall, 100-pound wooden alien statue that belonged to Art Bell. And Art Bell actually called me and said, this thing has got to go. He'd had it for years in his studio, but his new wife and daughter claimed it was coming to life at night and running around the house and scaring them half to death. And
maybe you should have gotten a new wife and daughter. Really?
But he was very serious about it, and so this alien is now one of my favorite things that you can go see in the museum. And people go there and they say that they believe he is alive. And I could even tell you some stories about him moving that I can't explain. So you just never know what you're gonna find there at the museum.
Well, tell me a little bit about that crystal head skull that you found. Is that the 13th skull, or? I mean, it seems like several of them are missing, especially the 13th skull was missing.
Yeah.
What do you think about this one?
Well, you know what's interesting is that this was given to me by a benefactor, and for the time being, you know, that's why she wants me to sort of reserve her name, but it was made in another country. She believes that this was made recently, so this is not supposedly some kind of an ancient thing, but it's a very nice, well-made, very heavy crystal skull with that alien contour. And I am seeing more and more evidence that there actually is some kind of storage capacity within quartz crystal that we are going to be able to tap into. And one of the interesting things you'll find on my website is a video about a device called the wishing machine.
Yes.
And, and the wishing machine, it's a radionics box, and it does exactly what it sounds like. It's designed to make your wishes come true, and it's a mind-powered device. There's a 10-minute video there that sort of explains how it works, and I swear this thing works so incredibly well. We have shipped almost 1,000 of these around the world, and I've not gotten one negative report. In fact, on the contrary, people saying, this is amazing, I can't believe this changed my life. You can see all these testimonials. And one of the things in the circuit for this machine is quartz crystals. And I think that plays a big role in somehow connecting the human consciousness with the physical world.
Oh, well,
yeah,
I wanted to ask you.
Skull, that might have been given to you so they could monitor you with the crystal resonance and memory skull has.
By the way, I'm sorry. Where do you have this wishing machine, by the way? In your museum?
Oh, well, I've got a number of them. I actually have 2 right here in front of me that I use every single day.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And honestly, you know, I got to tell you, you know, my life is sort of a dream life. I mean, I'm very fortunate, and yet I think a big part of it is because I use these machines, and I'm living proof. I could tell you one story after another about things that I've been able to manifest using these machines that would seem absolutely impossible, stories that are almost unbelievable, but you know, it works because it allows your consciousness to manifest more easily.
Well, I wanted to say that the owner of the Revolution Radio, who is listening to this show live right now, just Skyped me and said that he made his own wishing machine. He says, I glued 2 old stove knobs to a Radio Shack project box. Okay, the question is, Nighthawk, does your dream come true every day? That's really the question. Well, Don, you had one last question that you wanted to ask?
Oh, yeah. Were you going to do any kind of studies on the chupacabra? And can you or maybe contact Monique when you got some really strange, great report to give? And if we're ever able to make it down your way, can we get a tour, you know, of your...
Oh, yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yes to all of the above.
I wanted to say that we are at the end of the 2 hours before we say goodbye. Please, everyone, go to the website, JoshuaPWarren.com. Get the book. It was dark and creepy night. Again, we've been talking to Joshua Warren. It has been a great night. Great pleasure for me to interview you. I'm definitely keeping in touch with you, Joshua. Wait for me because I will be around.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Monique. It's been a lot of fun.
My pleasure.
Thanks. Good
night.